Welcome back to Project Hardway.
Heads up!
Ah, jeez.
In this video, we're going to be putting the cylinder heads on and setting the valve lash for the solid lift cam in this 402 cubic inch big block Chevy for my 1979 Camaro. Check it out. Okay, so heads are back from the machine shop. Just had them cleaned up. I didn't even have them taken apart. I just had them evened out. I had talked about cutting them down to a smaller combustion chamber, but talking to the guy at the shop, because how close that intake valve is already to the edge of the combustion chamber, didn't really want to cut into it too far. So next I'm going to take these over to the paint shop and get them sprayed up, get them ready to go back on the engine. Okay, so here we are in the paint shop. What'd you expect? Got the cylinder head all taped up, got my ports covered on both sides, got the surface on the bottom of the head covered completely with the tape, and old spark plugs and spark plug holes. A lot of you guys will just use an old valve cover to cover up the top. The only set of big block valve covers I have are the aluminum ones that came on it. So took a little bit of extra time, but got the top end pretty well taped up. And now I'm going to do a little trick I learned in the first season of Hot Rod Garage. Ready? Bam! Did it work? Hey, it worked. Freshly painted cylinder head. So no overspray on anything. It looks good. Give that time to cure and really set in there. Then we'll be ready to put it on the engine. Once the heads are on the engine, that's it. It comes off the stand. Flywheel. Can't forget that plug in the back of the cam. Balancer. That's it. It's going back in the car. We're almost there. Okay, so this is it. With the last couple of things to do to the engine before I'm ready to put it back in the car. I'm very excited, but I'm still going to try to be patient about this. Before you go slapping the head back on, this is your last opportunity to look down in the cylinders, make sure you've got everything cleaned up, there's no debris in there. First off, before the head goes on, you need your gasket. I wanted to make sure that I maximize what I could from the compression ratio. I dug around on Summit's website to find the closest thing I could get for a head gasket that would not be too thick and not be too big on the bore center, which is one thing that the old head gaskets did have. I bet they were big enough for a 454. It's 396. It's a smaller bore, you know. This is a multi-layer steel head gasket, so instead of having paper and other things pressed together, this is just literally 3 layers of steel, one thicker in the middle, 2 thinner ones on the outside. There's a dowel on top of the cylinder here. And also I've got the cylinder bank I'm working on vertical, so that I should be able to bring my cylinder head over, drop it right on top of the engine, and hopefully not have to worry about it falling off. When you go to set the head down, you've got to make sure you just set it right down. If you tip it, dip it, drop it one way or the other, you could damage the head gasket and end up blowing it the first time you fire it up. So that's there. Now it's time for the cylinder head. Oh, shoo! Big block heads are so heavy. Incoming. Maybe? Yeah, you got that? Yeah. Oh boy. Hold on. I'm a short fella, and these are heavy. Whew. Now you see I stood on top of the engine stand there because I wanted to be able to get up and have enough leverage that I could set this thing down as close to square on it as I can. Because the last thing you want to do is get your cylinder head up there on top of your brand new head gasket, start shifting things around too much. Which I might have to shift it around a little bit, but hopefully, there we go. Just a little bit, and I lifted a little bit up as I was pulling it back towards me. Now, the next thing to do is the head bolts. Head bolts are always done in a specific sequence at a specific torque. I have got these ARP head bolts. And before you say, oh, you should got the head studs. I'm not running boost, I'm not running crazy high compression. I don't need head studs. I could buy head studs, and it's cool to say, oh yeah, I got head studs on it. But if you don't need it, you're just wasting your money to say that you've got it. So I've got ARP head bolts. They give you this ultra torque assembly lube. No. Big block and small block Chevy head bolts go into water jackets. And I don't care how confident they are in their stuff. I'm going to be putting some red Loctite head bolt and water jacket sealant. So it's made for this. It's made to do this. It's just I'm doing with ARP stuff, and they'd rather me not, but I'm going to anyway. But I'll still put some of their lube on the bottom of the washers, on the bottom of the head bolts, just to give them some anti-seize properties when they get on there. So I'll get that stuff laid out, get it ready, and we'll go through torquing the head down. So prep on these head bolts, the end of the package is torn open a little bit, so I can just take that, roll it around. I don't need a ton of this stuff on there, just a little something on there. These ARP washers have got a tapered end. I don't know if that's showing on camera right now or not. And a flat end, get that flat end down. You want the flat surface up against the top of your cylinder head. So slide that on there after putting some of that lube on there. I'm gonna grab my head bolt and water jacket sealer. I don't need a ton of this stuff. Just gonna put a little bit on there, spin it around into the bottom of the threads. And then as it gets twisted down into the hole there for the bolt hole, it will get on the threads there and work its way onto everything as it goes down. These are 1/2 inch headed bolts. So now I'll take my ratchet, and I'm not applying any torque. I just run it down until it stops. Make sure that it goes in and goes down smoothly. That way you know that your threads are clean and you're not going to have anything that's going to interrupt your torque reading, give you a false reading. So for the ARP head bolts for the big block Chevy, they say to do 3 equal steps, working your way up to 70 foot-pounds. I could do 23, 23, and 24, so I think we're going to do that. The tightening sequence for the big block Chevy starts with this bolt, goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then it bounces back over here for number 6, 7, 8, 9, back over here 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So it's kind of all over the place in the middle, but at the end of the day, it works its way from the inside to the outside. Just like when we talked about with taking stuff off, start that has a sequence at least. Start from the outside, work your way inside. So I've got my torque wrench over here. It's set up already to 23 foot-pounds. So I'm gonna start there, and just like I talked about with the main caps and the rod bolts, consistent, even pressure. As soon as it clicks, stop. Again, feeling for any drag, anything that might be keeping the bolt from going down, give me a bad reading. But I also want to make sure that I'm getting consistent application of the torque, so that I know that I'm getting a consistent amount of torque applied to each bolt. There are 16 head bolts on a big block Chevy. 4 of those little guys, and then 12 of the big ones. This is where we jump back over here to number 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Now if you notice, as I went through, I had already run all these bolts down by hand until they stopped. But as we went from the inside to the outside, I was having to travel further and push those bolts down even further. That's because on a millimetric level, the head was sinking in the middle and still up on the outsides. So as you tighten that gap going further and further out, it loosened up the bolts that were not torqued yet. So that's the first set. Now I will go up to 46, so we'll add 23 more to the 23 we just did. Now set at 46 foot-pounds. Run through them again. And you'll see as we go through this, as the torque gets tighter and tighter, you'll see the engine stand moving a lot more and more. And I get the feeling when we get up there to that 70 foot-pounds, my engine stand is going to try to walk away from me, and I'll be chasing it down with my foot, trying to hold it still. Wouldn't be the first or last time it's happened. 8. I may have this figured out for too long. Right now I've got kind of a cheat sheet off to the side that shows me the torque sequence for the head bolts. If you can remember the torque sequence for a specific engine's head bolts or anything like that, you know, good on you. You know that engine well. You might be a little bit crazy too. David Freiberger. Anywho. Oh, she getting jiggly now. All right, that was 46 and crank her up to 70. Fast stop. Torque, baby. Oh yeah. Hear that hard, solid snap. While I'm doing this, especially on the higher torque, I'm getting a real feel for the bolts as they go in. A lot of times, if you've got a hole that's about to strip out, you can almost sense it coming, because, you know, I'm sitting here, I'm moving these bolts a certain amount. Let's see, we'll call it about 45 degrees to get to the next torque setting. And if one were to keep going further than that, we'd be in trouble. Be in trouble. 4, 16. Boom. There you have it. One freshly torqued to spec big block Chevy cylinder head. Now I'll repeat the same process on the other side, and then we're ready to set the valve train in place. All right, valve train's back in place. I put some of that Iskey's Rev Lube on the lifters and on the tips of the push rods. Rocker arms are all in place real quick. So we're gonna go through and set the valve lash on the #1 cylinder, because that's what you gotta do with a solid lift. You gotta have a little bit of gap in there. I'll show you guys that, and then I'll repeat the process for the other 7 cylinders. Okay, so solid lift cam, you gotta have a little bit of a gap between the tip of the rocker and the tip of the valve, because there's no give in the lifters because they're solid. This camshaft is the entire reason that I took this engine apart. I didn't know what camshaft was in it. When I got it out, I found it was from a company called Reed's. They no longer exist, and the only specs I could find on it were the duration and the lift, but I couldn't find the valve lash setting. So honestly, I'm about to just set her a little tight. You know, if you get them too loose, they'll wipe out a cam lobe, because every time that the cam comes around and hits the lifter, it will slap it too much. It won't be there'll be too much of a gap down there. It'll be too much free play in the valve train. You set them too tight, and you can put the pressure on them, too much pressure on them, that can mushroom your lifters or wipe out a cam lobe as well. But I'm going to try to find a happy medium. With a cast iron head and a cast iron block, you get about 0.02 of growth once everything gets up to operating temperature, so that gap will open up a little bit. I'm going to set these at about 15 thousandths ish, which means that once it gets warmed up, they'll be at about 17 or 18. and I think I feel pretty comfortable with that. This has got a lot of duration and overlap, but it does not have a whole lot of lift, so I don't think it'll be too much pressure on the system to do that. So the first thing you want to do is you want to roll the engine over until you get the rocker on, or the lifter onto the base circle of the cam. Now, if you've got the intake off like I do, you can just look down there in the lobe, in the valley, see the lifter, see the lobes on the cam, and know where it's going to sit at. If not, the best thing to do is turn the engine over until the intake valve closes and the exhaust valve just starts to open. That tells you that you're definitely on the base circle of the cam for the intake rocker. For the exhaust, especially in a cam with a lot of overlap, the exhaust will still be open when the intake starts to open. So when you go to set the valve lash for the exhaust, I like to run the rocker up to where the intake opens all the way and is just starting to close. That lets me know that if that intake's on its way to being closed, it's getting ready for compression stroke, which means the exhaust is definitely closed. Now, I've already turned this engine over. I've got the exhaust just starting to open. I've got the intake on the base circle of the cam. Got my 15 thousandths gauge. Not quite there. So I'm going to turn the nut on the outside until I can just get that gauge in there. Loose, and it doesn't take much when you're talking thousandths of an inch to turn this nut and get it to where it needs to be. Yeah, I can just see a little much there. Alright, I can just barely get that in there. So I'm going to try to keep that in the position it should be in. Now I'm going to use my Allen wrench to, now I've done moved this thing all over the place, but I'm going to cinch this down anyway because I feel like I'm still pretty close on. Use the Allen screw to cinch down the rocker nut, make sure the rocker nut doesn't turn while you're tightening it. 15 thousandths gauge, and I can just get it in there. So that's good. Intake is set. Now I'm going to roll over. If you can see that, I don't know if you can, but you'll see the intake valve is going to open. There's the exhaust valve opening. Exhaust valve is not closed yet, but the intake valve is starting to open now. So we'll get the intake valve open. And then as I see that intake valve start to close, start to go up now, I know that the exhaust is on the base circle. And we'll get ready to make some compression. So 15 thousandths there. I think I may have already set that off camera. Yeah, it's good. So there you go. Now I'll repeat that process for the other 7 cylinders. You don't have to go in any particular order. You just keep, as long as your engine's pretty well lubricated like mine is, you can just keep rolling her over until you get your valves where you need them to be. I say I'm going to repeat that process. Those with a keen eye will notice I don't have the nut on this rocker arm because the pivot ball is gone. And I'll tell you, this stuff has been sitting in a box, organized, all laid out off to the side, and I don't recall there being any incidents where something fell over or anything like that, but I cannot find that pivot ball. So once I find the pivot ball, or maybe just buy a new one, I'll finish the valve train, and then I'll be ready to get the engine off the stand. Hey, look what I found. Hold on. Not so much with the light, I guess. Look, that's the control arm. I'm just going to stab in the dark here. Would you look at that? Pivot ball. Hell yeah. Thanks for watching, guys. Join me next time when that engine goes from where it was to where you're at right now. Remember, life isn't always easy. Sometimes you got to do it the hard way.